biology, really, along a very well-trodden path in Britain, which is that I was a fanatical bird watcher as a kid. And I remember the Observer's Book of British Birds, a little book that one put into a pocket. Every picture is now imprinted on my mind. I could describe any picture of any species there. And then you begin to look and you find that, I think within a week of starting to keep a nature diary, I'd seen a tree creeper and a greenfinch and a woodlark and so on. They're all there to be seen. You just need to have your eyes opened and to look.
Aubrey Manning has spent his life studying animal behaviour and infecting others with his enthusiasm. Professor of Natural History at Edinburgh University for more than 20 years, he's inspired several generations of students with his love of animals and plants. His 7 wonders of the world include the dances of honeybees, the immortality of trees, the Tasmanian tiger, and the square root of -1.
My first wonder of the world is a tree. It has to be a tree, the largest and most long-lived of all living things. This is the Great Yew of Ormiston. It's an ancient monument in Gothic letters on the Ordnance Survey maps and so on. And local tradition has it that this tree is 1,000 years old and that John Knox preached underneath it in about 1560 or something. But actually, it isn't as old as that. We have made various measurements and we think it's about 350 to 375 years old. So Knox couldn't have preached under this tree. But I think there have been yew trees on this site probably for 1,000 years. And the reason is that this is a walking yew. You can see what happens. The one tree gets hold and then the branches curve over and hit the ground eventually. And then new trees begin sprouting up. Eventually, I think, after a few hundred years more, this central part may die out, and one of its children, well, it's actually part of itself. It isn't a child in the genetic sense. It's part of itself is going to grow up again. If the planet survives, 1,000 years from now, one of these trees will be the Great Yew of Ormiston. Plants have this extraordinary facility, don't they? I mean, if we stick our hands into the earth, we're not going to grow another human being on the end, but this thing sticks a branch into the earth and it grows another yew tree. So they are, for me, the ultimate wonder of the world, and I like the feeling of continuity which they give us. I know many people perhaps feel that trees remind them of our mortality. They're here before you arrive, and they're going to be here a lot longer than you after you've gone. I don't mind that. I find that exhilarating. I do love a sense of time and of continuity. I love living in an old house, which is several hundred years old in parts, and I love trees for the same reason. It is attractive to me, whereas I think possibly to many people it's actually unattractive. It is too much a reminder of mortality. Memento mori. Remember you must die. It's on all the gravestones. I used to think the skull and crossbones were rather a depressing symbol of, the charnel house and we all come to this and so on. But in fact, I was told, I think it's correct, that the early Christians believed when you had to move a skeleton to make room for more graves, you just took the skull and the cross thigh bones and put them in the charnel house where they were stored, because it was believed that was enough to have full bodily resurrection afterwards. You just needed the skull and the crossbones. So in a sense, the skull and crossbones are a symbol of resurrection and not of death at all. But the hourglass is a symbol of death. No question. Of all the panoply of things that one could pick from animal behaviour. I've chosen the honeybee communication dance. People have known for millennia, I guess, certainly the Greeks knew that honeybees had a way of alerting their hive mates about food sources. I will always remember the beautiful sunny morning in Whiteham Woods when I was working with I worked with bumblebees and how they responded to flowers. That was my research problem. And I had a number of marked bees which were foraging at this table which I had, which had a little dish of sugar solution on it. And it's fascinating how when you've a marked bee, it becomes an individual too, because you see it over 3 or 4 days, and there's old red spot back again, and so on. And these bumblebees were just flying backwards and forwards, and I was measuring their responses. And then a honeybee appeared and looked around and then alighted and drank. And I thought nothing of it. But I should have known better, because within, I think, 15 minutes, there were something like 60 honeybees flying around and completely mucking up any observations I was going to make on dear old Red Spot, who was still going backwards and forwards. And of course, this is the power of the thing. The honeybee, of course, communicates. They do this by basically the rhythm of the dance, which includes sounds as well as movements. People have got a model bee to work, and so you can have a bee model dancing on the comb about a food source which no bee has ever visited. And that's the crucial test. There's no possibility of scent or following somebody. And the bees go out and find this place. But I think the most dramatic thing of all was von Frisch's discovery that the bees have a way of communicating the direction on which a food source exists. Von Frisch was a very quiet, retiring man, very obsessed with bees. I love him for that. He thought that bees were just, they were all you needed. If you've got bees, who needs anything else? Von Frisch began his life working on fish, I think. And then he started going on the bee dance, and he worked on it for many years before he made this breakthrough. What he was doing was recording these dances through the day on the vertical comb of the hive. There must have been a morning when he realized that the bees feeding at one dish, going backwards and forwards, were gradually changing the angle of their dance. And you might not make much sense of that at first, random or something, or just error. But then he began to correlate and must have recognized that it was changing by 15 degrees per hour. And that must have been a eureka experience. I hope he leapt in the air, because of course 15 degrees per hour is the apparent movement of the sun through the sky. And so it must mean that the angle on the vertical comb was being translated in some fashion. The angle to the sun was being translated. And we now know that they do it, that honeybees have this remarkable convention that up means towards the sun. We've always tended to underestimate small animals that are distant from us. Insects are very strange creatures in many ways. They live in a different kind of world to us. And I think the miraculous things that they achieve in animal behaviour and adaptiveness, there are very many of them. All of these are quite wonderful. We lived near Kew Gardens, but I don't remember becoming completely entranced by the natural world until we moved out into Englefield Green in Surrey. Quite soon after that, I joined the Boy Scouts in my school, and one of the first badges I set out for was the naturalist badge, and that really began to open my eyes. I think my feeling was just infinite curiosity about animals and how they behaved. My next wonder of the world is a rather obscure animal. at least people may think it's obscure. It's the thylacine, or marsupial wolf. It's extinct, and only just extinct. A strange-looking animal. Here it is, and you see it's really very like a wolf, very like a wolf indeed. It's about the size of an Alsatian dog, a bit short in the leg, and it's sometimes called the Tasmanian tiger because of these stripes across the rear end. Well, it is extraordinarily similar to the wolf. A couple of skulls here, which is the real wolf and which is the marsupial wolf. It's pretty difficult to tell them apart. In fact, this is the marsupial wolf. But what I think is so wonderful, what is that natural selection has produced the same answer to the same question from totally different beginnings. Because the common ancestor between the marsupial wolf and the real wolf lived about 130 million years ago. The ancestors of these mammals were really very similar to this, small, little eating insects, nocturnal. And so the mammals began to get going, filling all the available niches. And over most of the world, the placental mammals, the ones we're familiar with, we're placental mammals ourselves, won out. But where they were isolated, the marsupials stayed on. And of course, Australia is the place we immediately think of for all the pouched animals, the kangaroos and wallabies and so on. But there were pouched carnivores as well. And so this thylacine evolved. It was known to be able to open its jaw almost to right angles. It's a marvellous example of parallel evolution. I always think a bit like getting the best result. It's a bit like racing cars. I love vintage racing cars, and when you go and look at the racing cars of the 1910s, 1920s, they're all fantastically different. I mean, Maserati had one idea, Delage another, Bugatti went off on his own, ERA, Ferrari and so on, all totally different because they were trying to get the fastest car. If you look at Grand Prix racing cars now, it really takes you have to read the adverts to be able to tell them apart, because we've been very ingenious. We've built the best possible kind of racing car, and it's converged. Just as in there's one best design for a racing car, aerodynamically and in road holding, there is one best design for a big dog. Natural selection says build a big carnivorous dog. That's the answer. You get this answer from totally separate roots. It's a remarkable piece of parallel evolution. What's poignant about it, though, for me, is that there aren't any thylacines now. If the animal was eating your sheep, kill it. And indeed, in 1888, the Tasmanian government put a bounty on the head of thylacines. You got £1, I think, for every adult you brought in, and 10 bob for every young animal. Thousands of them were killed. There were captive ones, and the last captive thylacine, who was given the name Benjamin, died in the Hobart Zoo on the 7th of September 1936, and we have a piece of poignant film of it, which brings tears to my eyes. All the 130 million years of genetic and environmental interaction which have produced this marvellous animal is gone. Well, there's one other irony. Here's the crest of the state of Tasmania, and it's got a couple of thylacines as its supporters. I think that's really very typical of us. We use animals as symbols. They represent something to us. But of course, if they happen just get in our way in any way, we just brush them aside, throw them away. I compare this with the Chinese, who one of their years is named the year of the tiger in their 12-year system. And it's an important animal to them, but idiotic Chinese medicine is probably going to result in the extinction of the tiger in the wild, because they poach it for claws and penis bones, and they drain the gallbladders of poor bears for this ludicrous medicine. So it's just the human beings detaching themselves from nature, really, and seeing other natural objects as just there to be exploited, and not thinking about balance. We're slowly learning, but I fear it's too late for the thylacine, and I fear it'll be too late for the tiger in the wild. My next wonder of the world is something that doesn't exist and can't exist. It's little I, which in mathematical terms is the square root of -1. I know maths is very off-putting to many people. I'm certainly not a mathematician, not at all. I haven't used maths in my work ever in any serious way. But I had the great good fortune to have a simply wonderful mathematics master at school. I can see him now, a tall figure. He never had any discipline problems. He just walked into a room and silence. His name was Brown, A. Brown. I never knew what the A stood for. One day he introduced this concept of I, the square root of -1. And what was magical for me was that he showed us how it could be used in mathematical calculations of various sorts to give you a really practical result. There were certain sorts of equation, I remember, which were best solved if you introduced the I at an early stage in your factorization or something, and you went through various procedures which having I in there enabled you to do. And then at the end, you came up with an answer which had somehow I was got rid of at the end, discarded. It sometimes appeared above and below the line on a fraction so that it just cancelled out. Or it might end up as I squared. And that's okay, because I squared is by definition -1. So you simply, -1 is a real number, so you put it back in again. I thought that was simply magical. I've been talking to my mathematically sophisticated colleagues, and they tell me that, yes, certainly imaginary numbers are widely used in population genetics, in the calculation of resistances in alternating circuits, in analysing certain properties of light which is vibrating in different wavelengths. It's put to use, and that to me is a wonder. Because here is an imaginary thing which we know doesn't have any real existence, which is put to our service. And that's the human intellect firing on all cylinders. My next wonder of the world is an example for me that exemplifies human ingenuity in making things, the other aspect of our intellect, really. And I've chosen a governor. It's called the hit or miss governor. And I used to see this working about once a year when I visited relatives in Birmingham. It was in the Birmingham Science Museum. A governor is a thing which you put on a piece of machinery to stop it running too fast or to make it run at an even speed. This was, I think, in connection with gas engines. If you put a load on it, the speed will drop. But that's very bad. You want it to keep constant. What happens is that the hit or miss governor gives the thing a pulse of gas when the speed goes down. It's called hit or miss because when the speed is up, it misses this ratchet which enables it to collect and deliver a pulse of gas. And when the speed drops, it hits the ratchet and gives it a pulse of gas. Two minutes looking at the hit or miss governor and I understand how it works. So for me it's a symbol. It represents all of human machinery, all of human ingenuity. It puts me in mind of that wonderful film of Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. And what Kubrick is saying there, I think, is once human technology gets started, all the rest was absolutely inevitable.
11, 10, 9. And we have a go for main engine start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we have liftoff. Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour on an ambitious mission to surface the Hubble Space Telescope.
I want to use that simple, crude hit or miss governor as a symbol of human ingenuity.
10 ohms, 1 not required, and it's a beautiful sunrise.
This quarry hasn't been worked for centuries, but one can't look at it, surely, without feelings of the most profound reverence. What did these stonemasons give us? Well, I don't want to be accused of exaggeration, so let me just say, the finest Romanesque building in the world.
Alec Clifton Taylor, who's one of my favourite writers and also television person about architecture, says that going in through that door is one of the great architectural experiences he's ever had. And I completely agree with him. One's scalp crawls when you go in there. To say that for me it's not a religious experience. I realise I'm entering a house of God, but that isn't what I get from it. There's an awe about going into a building that is 900 years old. You get the feeling of successive generations who stood where you're standing and seen that site. I don't have any religious faith now. I was brought up a rather strict Baptist, actually, and I do remember that it was when I went to study biology at University College London that I began to have serious doubts. I think I'm still left with a great problem. I can't get my mind around, the Big Bang and what came before the Big Bang, and is that a meaningful question? I think probably some of the physicists would say that's not a question you can ask. But I do still ask it. I felt I must choose something which reflects the beauty of the planet itself. It's pretty hard. It is a beautiful place, but I thought that the Grand Canyon of the Colorado in Arizona and New Mexico is really the top for me. Everybody knows about it. I mean, it's one of the most famous places in the world. It's like going to Venice or the Song of the Nightingale or something. And very often when you go to or you experience such things, there's a sense of letdown. You're so familiar with it that it isn't really quite all that you imagined it to be. But with the Grand Canyon, I found when I saw it some time ago that it was every bit more wonderful than I could have imagined. The ground disappears in front of you, and it drops down for a mile in depth. It's over 5,000 feet deep. The river Colorado has carved through these sandstones and limestone rocks over the millions of years, but at the same time, I believe, the land was elevating. So there was a kind of double effect, and maybe this sort of helped the Grand Canyon. It was always cutting faster than it might have done if the land had been static. It's like a great gash in the surface of the earth. And the effect is just mind-boggling. And of course, as soon as you begin to learn a little about it or go down it, you realize that it gives you a history of the earth. From the top to the bottom, I think is about 400 million years of deposits. Through it, as you go down, you begin in the Triassic, which is the period right at the beginning of the great age of reptiles. You go on down, of course, the reptiles slowly die out and you get amphibians coming in, and then the fish come in lower down. And then invertebrates, you get lots of trilobites and so on. And then as you go down to the bottom, you can see no fossils at all. So you've gone down through 400 million years of the Earth's history in a distance of a mile, completely stark, laid out like a textbook model. I haven't seen it for 30 years now, but it's still as vivid in my mind as the day I saw it. I feel the Earth is a wonderful place. I always think of the gypsy in Lavengro, George Borrow's Lavengro, who says, "There's a wind on the heath. Life is very sweet, brother. Who would wish to die?" Life is very sweet. I think it is, and one of the things that makes it sweet is seeing how beautiful it is.